It's Bronzebird here with another video. Before I begin, like and subscribe. So I meditated on this conversation for the last couple of days. A part of me did not want to do this video. A part of me did want to do this video to share my perspectives as a so-called African-American man or a North American Negro man on my take about the increased violence with Asians coming from so-called Black people, allegedly. And the recent news about a so-called white man that shot up a nail salon, I believe, in Atlanta. My take is that on this, I've been noticing this for the last year because of the coronavirus, that a lot of Asians have been the victims of attacks from other people, especially so-called Black people. Therefore, a lot of stereotypes being attributed to them that doesn't necessarily apply to them. Like the fact of the matter that when it comes to the coronavirus, they are definitely getting blamed. And the fact of the matter that they're wearing masks on their face exactly says that they are people who's harming the United States of America. This is my thing. This is my take. I do not support at all anyone being violent towards another person because of what nation they are. I have an understanding that when it comes to racism, racism is an inevitable thing in our country. No matter how many times we try to fight through it and say that it doesn't exist, or the fact of the matter we should get over it, there will always be differences between nations, regardless of how you put it. Now, I wanted to share this photo about Rush Hour with Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker, the first installment happening in 1998. Only because of the fact of the matter, I wanted to show the unison between a so-called Black man and an Asian man. And that when they come together, they can be an unstoppable force. Now, this is the thing. A lot of people may get it. A lot of people may not. I've heard from different constituents that when it came to the first samurai, even though it may be relative or not be relative, that the first samurai was a so-called Black man. I forgot the name, but I'm pretty sure people in the comment section can go ahead and give me the name and tell you exactly who the man was. Now, this is the thing about this whole entire conversation. I'm going to play 3 videos to give my perspective about what's going on, this whole entire solidarity thing that's going on, and also attributing to the fact of the matter that here in New York itself, that there has been a lot of Asian restaurants and Asian businesses that closed down shop because of the coronavirus, and about how a lot of people were skeptical about going to Chinatown to go and purchase whatever items or eat food from that type of area, especially in Manhattan. And that also that Flushing, Queens had got the brunt of a lot of the discrimination tactics because of the coronavirus and that being attributed to them. One last thing I have to say, I think I'm going to bring it up later in this video, but I'll start playing the videos now so that you guys can get a frontal view exactly how I feel about these situations. So this is the apparent conversation that's going on recently with a so-called white man who decided to shoot up a spa in Georgia. Now, we have an understanding, usually a lot of these spas is owned by Asians themselves. Usually I would see Filipinos in my neighborhood owning spa shops. Well, not necessarily spa shops, but nail salons. And, you know, Koreans own the hair care stores. I'll be having a conversation about that later, but I'm going to let this video play so we can have a frontal view about what's going on. So peep.
Was charged with murder and assault. 8 people were killed at 3 spas near Atlanta last night. 6 of the victims were Asian. 7 of them were women. Police tracked down 21-year-old Robert Aaron Long about 150 miles south of Atlanta. Investigators say
that's a Gen Z kid that did this. This is really crazy. I'm here. Let me hear more of his story.
He has confessed to the crime. They also say he told them he was trying to eliminate his, quote, sex addiction.
Suspect did take responsibility for the shootings, does claim that it was not racially motivated. He apparently has an issue, what he considers a sex addiction.
Now, investigators say the suspect was planning another attack in Florida. It comes amid a wave of violence against Asian Americans from New York to California. President Biden says he spoke with the FBI about this investigation.
Now, my thing about it is this. I don't understand how sex addiction correlates with shooting. Maybe there is some type of, well, let me not say that. I think there is some probably some type of sex addiction that correlates with shooting someone and, you know, necrophilia, but necrophilia doesn't play out in this situation because they still were alive and then he shot them. Unless he was planning something afterwards. And I'm not saying that to be funny. I'm just trying to understand the motive behind what he did. And yeah.
Very concerned because, as you know, I've been speaking about the brutality against Asian Americans for the last couple months, and I think it is very, very troubling.
South Korea's foreign ministry says 4 of the women who were killed are of Korean descent. Now, here close to home in New York, the NYPD is increasing its presence in Asian communities all across the city. It's an effort to ease the growing anxiety after that shooting last night and the uptick in hateful attacks. For more on this.
And I'm sorry, y'all. I got to be honest because this was sitting in my soul for a long time. This is a lot of bullshit discrimination tactics that happen every single time they say so-called Black people discriminate against other races of people, other nations. It's the same thing they did last year with the Jewish people, even though Jews are not a race, they are a religion, okay? They are a religion, but New York City always does this. So if there's ever any attacks on so-called Black people, do they try to, especially with the coronavirus, when it's been allegedly said that the so-called Black people are at most risk for the coronavirus, did they ever try to go to our neighborhoods and have a conversation with us, check on us and see if we okay? I mean, yes, I get it. They right now with the coronavirus, what they're doing is they're sending out 2 bus routes to ensure that so-called black people take a vaccine at these nearby colleges and facilities, the B98V and Q98V. But that is a different type of conversation. It doesn't add on to the fact of the matter there has been a string of certain attacks that happen to so-called Black people where they have been victims and Asians have been the perpetrators. Especially a lot of the stories that's been heard in other stories back in 1991 with the riots that happened with the so-called Black child that got killed by a so-called Asian.
We're going to go out to News 4's Mark Santia, who joins us live from Midtown. Mark.
And Natalie, the tragedy in Atlanta is being felt here across the city as the NYPD steps up security. Here at 46 on Mott Street, Sid Mo is serving up lunch, but his thoughts are in Atlanta and here in New York City, where anti-Asian crimes have the community concerned.
It's really sad that it's happening. We're finally getting recognition, I guess, because it happens a lot here.
On the streets of Chinatown today, the NYPD's Community Affairs Rapid Response Team, including Detective Soup 2, who speaks several Asian languages.
You know, anytime you see a tragedy like we saw in Atlanta, we want to come out and make sure people feel safe. It's one thing to hear that there's no threats. There's another thing for people to actually see it and feel safe.
Today's message: how to contact police and report hate crimes in any language.
Just want to make sure that we're able to do it in a language where they feel most comfortable.
This is a devastating and heartbreaking day around the country.
In Times Square today, mayoral candidate Andrew Yang speaking out against the rising tide of anti-Asian.
Andrew Yang is my boy, by the way. He's cool. I like him.
Hate.
We have to come together and say that this cannot be allowed to continue.
Back on Mott Street, the Rapid Response Team makes a stop to speak with Sid.
Thank you, Sid.
Who says this interaction between cops and community is vital.
That's great that they're commuting around here, helping everybody out. It's great to have the presence out here. It feels a lot safer.
The NYPD has already investigated 10 Asian hate crimes since January, a stunning jump from this time last year when none had been reported. Now, a total of 30 were reported in all of 2020. Well, I'm in Midtown. I'm Mark Santia, News 4 New York.
In this video, I'll play next, but I just wanted to give my perspective real quickly. You know, I hear a lot of so-called Black people complaining, especially with a lot of the increased force of police being able to go into these Asian communities and be there for the Asian people and ask if they're okay and if they are protected. Now, my understanding is this, just like with my example about Jewish people, especially in Brooklyn, especially with crimes happening in Crown Heights and other neighborhoods like Williamsburg and other places. The thing about it is that when we have this conversation, it's a talk about power. When you have the financial ability to be able to protect yourself or own all these businesses, a lot of things will go your way. So-called Black people, which I'm not going to say don't have no type of union when it comes to certain things, it's more or less on a less scale. If so-called Black people are focusing on things like how I have these usual conversations of hearing things like so-called Black people are mad at Asians for owning hair care stores in their neighborhood or owning all these other businesses in the so-called Black community. This is the thing. So-called Black people can't put their money where their fucking mouth is. And that's the problem with a good amount of these so-called Black people. So-called Black people are more concerned on spending things out of vanity than understanding that they should be coming together to come up with a resource where they all can shine and get together. Now, in my neighborhood, I do see an increase of so-called Black businesses where they are selling the same things that Asians would usually sell. The problem is there is no uniformity with so-called Black people, that they allow other nations of people to sell merchandise and sell poison to them without actually trying to come up with a commerce to help themselves. Now, I do believe that in certain factions, politics does help. Then especially now, a lot of so-called Black people cry out for help because of gentrification. This is my thing on a sort of matter. When do so-called Black people take a rise on being more about selves and sit up there not trying to hand out themselves to other nations and focus on themselves? Will it ever happen? We don't know. And again, I do not make this video to be a racist. I make this video to give an analysis about the things that's going on in our world and for me to give a proper assessment to what is it that I think. Now, this video right here will feature about the Black and Asian solidarity that happened with the Black Lives Matter protest that happened last year. Actually, one of my videos is a compilation about the quote unquote Black Lives Matter protest, also with the J31 protest that had to deal with the MTA and people not wanting to pay the fare because of the fare hike that they wanted to produce. Now, I'm gonna play this video probably for the next 2 minutes, probably won't play the whole thing, but I just wanna share this with you, and I'll play one more video so that I can give my assessment and we can get out of here. So peep.
Proud Black Filipino man. My very presence is the ideology of liberation.
Okay. I am Roderick Covington, and I'm co-hosting this Agents for Black Lives Matter with Will.
1 second. That brother right there, and I'm not going to talk down on him, but I did remember seeing him, and you know, I asked a question to that brother if he ever understood what was on the website for Black Lives Matter and why they don't support so-called Black men. He could not even give me an answer, y'all. Could not even give me an answer. I guarantee you. A lot of these brothers that join this Black Lives Matter protest want to feel good like they're doing something, and I don't blame them for it. If you feel a passion in something that you're doing, that's great. But a lot of people need to read between the lines of why I just don't give a shit about Black Lives Matter and why I disgustingly do not like Black Lives Matter at all. Again, so-called Black man, the Black Lives Matter movement is not for you.
That person is oppressed. We are all oppressed. So when I say,
and that's that bullshit that they be talking all the time. This is a problem I have with this. I'll probably make a video on this later. So-called Black people are so interested in knowing what other nations is doing instead of worrying about themselves. And this is a prime example right here.
no justice, I mean no peace. No justice, no peace.
I wanted to organize this event because historically, Asians and Blacks have fought alongside each other for civil rights, for many of the civil rights that we enjoy today.
Asian Americans must be more vocal, visible, and take stands on crucial issues. Hopefully, Asians will side with the most dispossessed, oppressed, and marginalized, remembering our own history.
The thing that I really wish that Asian Americans knew about supporting Black Lives Matter is supporting Black Lives Matter is really actually supporting like Asians, because we are one race. We are one human race. And so
that's that weird world shit that they always talk about that pisses me off as a so-called Black man or the North American Negro. That pisses me off so much.
So it's really important for Asians to see themselves in Black people.
As someone who is
No, it's not about Asians seeing themselves in Black people. They have an understanding of who they are. They have a way that they move. They care about themselves, and they move efficiently to make sure that the income is staying within inside their race or nationality. So-called Black people, again, is more concerned about helping out other nations instead of helping themselves.
is, in fact, you know, dual race, I'm Jamaican and Chinese, I tell all my family to step out on both sides. We're supposed to be coming together to make everything and everyone safe. It starts with Black Lives, you know, coming together to make Black Lives Matter. We're here to protest a system that's not broken, a system that's designed to break people.
We want to start with defunding the police. So that's it. We want to start with
Why the fuck would you want to defund the police? My thing about it is this. Listen, I understand that when it comes to discrimination about police, they take on tactics about harming people. Get a lot of assholes that become police officers either for pay or because of the fact of the matter they have something to prove about their masculinity. That's what usually happens with these dudes that take their anger out on people, especially when it comes to making arrests. But defunding the police, would that mean that so-called Black people need to come together and create their own entire organization to patrol their own neighborhoods to make sure people are staying out of trouble? That's a good question, isn't it?
There's only so much that we can do behind our screens, and it's important for us to use our bodies to show that there's support out here.
We Asians need to reshape our image from the rather quiet, ambiguous, accommodating, uncomplaining, palatable people to a more resolute, sensitive advocate for human worth.
And listen, this is my thing. I have no problem with people getting along, regardless of any nation you may come from. I'm a man of peace. I'm a man of spiritual prowess. My thing about it is this. My only beef on this conversation about so-called Black people and Asians is, again, this whole entire narrative that so-called Black people are so used to being concerned about other nations instead of being concerned about themselves for once. And my thing about it is that we're so quick to sit up there and shit on each other, but when it comes to other races of people, we want to show a love, especially the incident that happened last year with Africans that was in China that had a lot of problems with the people out there because they was being racist. The Chinese people were being racist to the Africans and kicking them out their homes and all these other things. My thing about it is this, there has always been a problem with Africans and Chinese people, because how it is when you are a foreigner in different lands, they will always treat you with some type of disgrace. Doesn't matter what nationality is. It is an inevitable thing that if you are a foreigner in another land, you will be treated differently. And I'm gonna play only maybe a minute or two about this video, and then I'm gonna stop this and have my final thoughts.
Black community to realize that that Black people are hurting Asians and they need to speak out in their own community.
Our communities are not.
And before I begin, I just need the statistics on that, because a lot of times when you see in the media, they make a hyperbole about a lot of these situations of trying to say the common so-called Black person is trying to hurt Asians. Now I get it, you do have a couple of knuckleheads that go ahead and harm Asians for no reasons, and they sit up there and start with Asian people. In my neighborhood especially, it's been known that so-called Black men have been on occasions harassing so-called Asian people when they deliver Chinese food. I mean, that's the things that I've seen, but that's not a common occurrence. It's just a couple of knuckleheads who don't know no better, AKA Pookies, who don't have nothing else better to do. And they sit up there and they design themselves to hurt so-called Asians on purpose. But I asked this question if they can give me a rapid statistic of proving that this is a common occurrence between so-called Black people and Asians.
Reporting these incidences, we don't want to cause more trouble, more attention to our community.
It strikes me that this is the Asian equivalent of the talk that African-American parents often have to have with their children. Montanas Ratanapakdi is grieving for her father, an always gentle soul.
Happy birthday, dear grandpa.
Her dad, Vichar, moved from Thailand to San Francisco to help his daughter and son-in-law, Eric, take care of their two sons. It wasn't long before the whole neighborhood fell in love with Grandpa.
Grandpa always friendly. All the neighbor. Grandpa always teaching us about forgiveness. All the neighbor remember him, and he's smiling.
But this is the video no daughter wants to see. Surveillance cameras capturing the moment her 84-year-old dad was attacked and violently knocked to the ground on a morning walk.
It's a painful. I don't want to see it. It's a broken heart.
Vichar died.
And let me say this to people, let me reiterate again. I do not advocate for violence against another person because of their nationality. It is not a good thing for you to do that. Now, that was a sad video to see. I don't like seeing that. And I definitely will say if that was a brother that did that, he should be reprimanded for his actions all the way through. But again, I just want to express that I would like to see the statistics of the crimes that happen between so-called Black people and Asians, because I want to make a fair assessment and a fair judgment in order to make the statement that I'm not feeling like this is a one-sided argument, that this is just another attack on so-called Black people to again share out their hand to make it seem as if we have to come through and care for other nations before we care about ourselves. That's my only point about this whole entire situation. Otherwise, I have no problem with having this conversation or having conversations or developing a friendship or being cool with Asian people, because I have Asian friends. So this is not a video of trying to reprimand them or berate them. I just need an accurate assessment about the statistics so I can make my fair judgment.
2 days later in the hospital.
He never wake up again, breathing on his brain.
What did you say to him when you got to see him in the hospital?
Dad, wake up. I want him to stay alive and wake up and come and see me again. But he never wake up again. And I pray for him.
The Thai immigrant's death, one of a slew.
This is now a year of these kinds of things going on.
The videos prompting more than 1,000 people to gather over the weekend in the Bay Area to speak out against anti-Asian violence, calling for racial justice. The community blamed the tension between Black people and Asian Americans.
I think they targeting to the Asian American community.
We need the Black community to realize that that Black people are hurting Asians, and they need to speak out in their own community.
It is not just a Black and Asian issue. It is something in the psyche of this country where somehow it's okay to physically or verbally abuse Asian Americans.
And that's the statement that I think that I agree with more than what that other guy just said. Again, my assessment about what is it that these statements are being made about being a so-called Black man, a so-called African-American, a North American Negro such as myself, is that there is usually a blame shifted to so-called African-American if it is one knucklehead that decides to go ahead and harm another nation of people. My thing about it is this: there has been many cases where Asians have themselves attacked so-called Black people, whether they own the business or they don't own the business. This has been on record. So my thing about it is, when you have these conversations, you have to be fair from both sides. Will I ever say that this so-called Black people are innocent in certain situations or harming other nationalities? Absolutely not. But do not try to make the so-called African-American the face of racism and discrimination towards Asians when it happens across the board with other nationality of people. Especially so-called white people could be discriminating or be prejudiced towards so-called Asians. So the idea that they paint the picture of the so-called African-American being the boogeyman of the situation is the thing that upsets me as a North American Negro, because I refuse to believe that so-called African-Americans on average are harming Asian people. I refuse to believe that statement. I refuse to believe that is the consensus of this whole entire conversation. I refuse to believe it, especially last year, where they had Grapevine have a whole entire stream where they was trying to have the conversations with Asians and so-called African-Americans on the same stream. So again, so-called African-Americans are more than likely to have a sit-down talk and have a conversations with other nationalities that they have a disagreement with, especially when it's knuckleheads out here who decide to sit up there and discriminate against another nationality.
Coming through.
Community leader Dr. Connie Won says it's clear Asians are being scapegoated and blamed for the pandemic.
When the previous administration said things publicly, like the Wuhan virus,
the China flu, the China virus, the plague from China, we have to be accurate.
Unapologetically, he helped to stoke the fires of anti-Asian violence against our communities.
Stop AAPI Hate began collecting more than 2,800 reports nationwide of anti-Asian hate between March and December. The NYPD reporting a nearly 2,000% increase in Asian American hate crimes last year. But Dr. Won says these accounts are merely the tip of the iceberg.
Our communities are not reporting these incidences. We don't want to cause more trouble, more attention to our communities.
In this moment, with calls for racial justice echoing, a broader conversation is taking shape.
Historically, there have been tensions between the African American and Asian American communities, but George Floyd galvanized the two communities in a way that I'd never seen before. I'd never seen more Asian Americans standing up in support of Black Lives Matter, myself included. And
well, I think what's happened in our world now, which could be a positive thing, is that you're starting to get Gen Z kids and millennials such as myself who's starting to see, you know, you got to put the racism down. We just got to get along, you know, and the whole class thing starts to become a more topic of conversation where your struggle might be my struggle, or my struggle might be your struggle. Well, I always allow for stories to be the topic of conversation. I don't mind that. But my thing about it is that, again, I stress that what is the statistics of so-called Black people harming so-called Asians? If it's more than that, I will be quiet. If anybody can show me those statistics, I'll be fine with that. But I have an understanding that as a so-called African-American man, such as myself, usually these ties into making a so-called Black person an enemy. Public enemy number one. That is, all nations are the ones that we decide to go ahead and harm ourselves. And I'm gonna end the video right there because I don't think I have much more to talk about. I just wanted to give this a quick view and, you know, give my perspective about what is it that I feel before I get out of here. My thing about it is this, people. I do not agree with unsolicited violence against another nation. I do not stand for prejudiceness. I understand that it is an inevitable thing in our country that each nationality is going to be racist to each other or prejudiced to each other in one way or another. As a so-called North American Negro such as myself, I've come across people that had a problem with me, whether it be a so-called white person, so-called Asian, even people of the diaspora, such as Caribbeans and Latinos. And last but not least, of course, Africans and other people of the nationalities. But it was never in my interest to serve up a hate enough for me to attack another nationality, especially with a time like this and a pandemic. My thing about it is this, people. Just read between the lines about the things that's going on. I'm not shifting blame on anyone. I'm not sitting up there saying anybody is at fault. I am just saying that this usually seems to be a tactic against so-called Black people that I do not stand for, that I do not like it. If this is a true statement, I will be quiet about it. But my thing about it is when we have these conversations about Asians, there has been multiple reports of so-called Asians harming so-called Black people. But is it to the same degree that's been reported about so-called Asian people harming Black people? I don't know. And I understand this is just a strategy of war. I don't even want to say strategy of war. It's the last days. I'm a spiritual man, so I have an understanding that it's going to be nations rising against nations. And usually who takes the bait for it is so-called Black people. So otherwise than that, stay tuned, stay aware, be safe, don't get yourself into trouble, and just be a good person. Otherwise than that, like and subscribe. Peace.